Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this Thursday afternoon for a new All Tech is Human live stream featuring author Cory Doctorow. A little bit before All Tech is Human, before we begin, All Tech is Human is a nonprofit committed to building the world's largest multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary network in responsible tech. You can read our reports, such as our Responsible Tech Guide, and our recent Responsible Tech Org List 2024 on our website, alltechishuman.org. You can also join our Slack community, which features more than 9,000 members across 90 countries. And on our website, you can also discover our Responsible Tech job board featuring around 500 new roles in responsible tech, as well as our talent pool. It is my distinct privilege to welcome to All Tech is Human's weekly live stream series, Cory Doctorow. Cory is a science fiction author, activist, and journalist. He is the author of many books, most recently The BEZZLE, a follow-up to Red Team Blues, and The Lost Cause, a solarpunk science fiction novel of hope amidst the climate emergency. His most recent nonfiction book is The Internet Con, How to Seize the Means of Computation, a big tech disassembly manual. Other recent books include Red Team Blues, a science fiction crime thriller, CHOKEPOINT Capitalism, a nonfiction book about monopoly and creative labor markets, the Little Brother series for young adults, In Real Life, a graphic novel, and the picture book POESY the Monster Slayer. In 2020, he was inducted into the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame. Cory, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And Cory, we have a lot to get to today with only a little bit of time. So I would love to start the conversation about our current internet and technology predicament. We're watching legacy social media platforms decay in real time. Platforms lose their core identities to keep up with emerging social and technical trends. And in November 2022, you coined the term enshittification to describe the pattern of decreasing quality of online services. Can you dive into this concept?
Yeah, sure. So, as you say, we're living through this moment. We can think of it as the platform collapse moment. So, platforms obviously are the endemic form of commerce on the internet, which is a little weird when you think about it, given how excited we used to all be about the notion of disintermediation. After all a platform is an intermediary. But one of the reasons we flocked to platforms is that they were quite useful for a long time. They were often even things that we loved using, and all of a sudden, all of them seem to be going sour in the same way. And so I have been talking about the risks of platforms and of loci of internet control and centralization for a long time. And I've coined lots of terms to describe it, but enshittification, because I think it's fun to say, really caught fire. Also, I think it came along at a time where it became a lot harder to deny the fact that we are living through, the Enshitticene, the great Enshittening. And enshittification takes the metaphor of a disease. So it says, look, there's a symptomology we see in these platforms. They all seem to decay in the same way. At first, they're quite good to their end users. Then they make things worse for their end users in order to make things better for their business customers. Then they make things worse for their business customers in order to return value to their shareholders. And then they turn into a pile of shit. And that's happening all around us. And that symptomology, I think once you understand it, once you're familiar with it, you can't help but see it. But it doesn't explain what's going on inside the businesses. Like, what is the mechanism in the body of the patient that's causing it to sicken? And it doesn't explain the contagion. Why are all these different firms getting sick all at once? And enshittification goes some way to explain both of those. As to the mechanism, as to what's going on inside the companies, my theory is that digital companies have an enormous amount of flexibility that allows whatever impulse there is to cheat to be very powerfully realized. That because you can change the price, the cost, the ranking, and other business fundamentals for every user, and every time every user interacts with the service, it's just very easy to set up this kind of system of pumps that moves value from end users to business customers or back again, or to shareholders or back again. And this allows you to play a lot of tricks, do a shell game that runs very fast. For example, if you're an Uber driver, you're subject to something that the anthropologist Vina Dubal has dubbed algorithmic wage discrimination. That's where Every job that comes up is priced dynamically based on whether you have been recently selective about which jobs you're willing to take. The most selective drivers are offered the highest wages, but only until they become less selective. If you get less choosy about which drives you'll take, the price per mile and per minute starts to go down in small, sometimes random intervals, such that you are kind of eased into a world where you do more and more Uber, less and less of whatever it was you used to do that lets you do less Uber, and where your wages just start to erode monotonically one day after another, until eventually you're in this permanent phase of immiseration with all your side hustles cooked. And that is what distinguishes digital from analog. There are lots of people who ran businesses in the 20th and 19th century who would have loved to have done this, black-hearted coal bosses and Tennessee Ernie Ford songs. It wasn't that they didn't have the imagination or the lack of moral center that would cause them to do this. It was just that, assembling a boiler room full of guys in green eye shades big enough to change everyone's pay packet from second to second was just uneconomical and impractical. And so now you get people who have the same impulses as their forebears, but more capability. And that's why that's how the disease works in the body. So if we know what the disease presents as, good to end users, good to business customers, finally good to shareholders, then a giant pile of shit. If we know how it's happening, the system of pumps that move value around, the last question to answer is, why is it happening now? What's the contagion? And there, I think we need to understand what prevented the disease in the first place. If people have the means and motive to shift value to themselves, why didn't they shift value to themselves 10 years ago and 20 years ago? What stopped them? What stopped them was a set of 4 constraints. The first constraint was that they had to worry about competition. And if you could take your business elsewhere, then they had to, on balance, treat you better. And when they didn't, on balance, you went somewhere else. Think of the decay of platforms like Yahoo or MySpace that finally died because they just weren't good. And they were kind of openly abusive to the people who had been bringing in the money for them. And that has kind of ended. The period of neoliberalism is many things, but almost most importantly here, the thing that neoliberalism is an end of competition law. Neoliberalism really started when Jimmy Carter and then Ronald Reagan said, we're just not going to stop people from forming monopolies anymore. We're going to treat monopolies as good. We're going to say that when we observe a monopoly in the wild, that what we're seeing is a company that's very efficient, a company that people love. If everyone shops at the same business and buys the same product there, it's because it's the best product being sold by the best business. And the job of the government shouldn't be to punish excellence. That's not what the taxpayers have put us into office to do. And as a result, we just let companies buy their competitors. We let them use predatory pricing to keep competitors out of the market or force them out of the market, whether that's Uber, losing 41 cents on the dollar to the tune of $31 billion over 13 years to extinguish all rival taxi companies and starve public transit of investment because it seemed uneconomical. Or whether it's a company like Google that has just bought its way to glory. There's a company that made one really good product 25 years ago, that great search engine, and then just spent 25 years buying other people's good ideas while spectacularly failing to produce anything of value in-house, right? Almost all of their in-house products failed, whereas their great successes, be that YouTube or ad tech or mobile or server management or document collaboration or mapping or satellite photos, you name it, these are just acquisitions. Google is not, Willy Wonka's idea factory. They're just like rich Uncle Pennybags. They go out and buy their competitors and then pretend that they invented them. So competition went away. And as competition went away, the number of companies in the sector dwindled. Today, we live with what Tom Eastman calls 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4. And when a sector dwindles to a handful of firms, not only do they all have lots more profit because they're not engaged in wasteful competition, but they also have a much easier time deciding how to spend their money. It's when there's 100 companies in the sector, there's always someone who's going to disagree with your regulatory strategy. But when there's 5, not only is it easier to come to an agreement, but everyone knows each other. They all worked with each other. There's 5 big companies in an industry. Everyone in the C-suite has worked in at least 3 of them. And so it's just very easy for them to collude to come up with a single regulatory policy. And this is how we get the tech platforms routinely violating our labor, consumer, and privacy rights, and just waving it away and saying, well, it doesn't matter because we did it with an app. It's not a violation when you do it that way. And the regulator's going, oh, yeah, it sounds good to me. So regulatory capture means that they don't have to worry about being punished for cheating. Competition means that you can't punish them for cheating by leaving. Regulatory capture also lets them stop you from trying to alter the rules of the deal back in your favor. Historically, because computers are so flexible, because digital is so, marvelous, it was always possible for users of technology to claw back a better deal than the tech companies were willing to give them. Printer company raises the price of ink, you get a third-party printer cartridge. Ads become too obnoxious on the website, you install an ad blocker. But what the tech companies have done through their regulatory capture is expand IP law and then use that to punish their rivals who try to do those things. If you were to say make a rival iPhone app store that you could jailbreak an iPhone and install, Apple would just like nuke you till you glowed. They'd say you violated the Digital Millennium Copyright Act's anti-circumvention provision, that you were a tortious interferer with the contracts with its end users, that you were stealing their trade secrets, that anyone who worked on it was violating a non-compete agreement, that you had violated their patents, their trademarks, their copyrights. They just destroy you. Meanwhile, when Apple was getting started and facing its own extinction level event, when Microsoft just refused to make a credible version of Microsoft Office for Mac OS, they just cloned Microsoft Office. They reverse engineered it, made iWork, and you get Pages, Numbers, and Keynote that perfectly read Excel, PowerPoint, and Word. Microsoft had to go pound sand because they didn't have this new suite of IP laws. Now that this new suite of IP laws exists, all these former pirates have turned admiral, and they use it to stop anyone from doing unto them as they did unto anyone else. They wrap their products in a skin of IP law that makes it illegal to do things that thwart their commercial plans. Jay Freeman, who tried to make an alternative app store for iOS, he calls this felony contempt of business model. And then the last constraint that used to operate on companies and stop them from enshittifying, but no longer does, is their own workforce. Because tech workers historically have had a lot of power, and they've been very motivated to use that power to defend their users. A lot of them really believed in the mission of tech. That's why you have tech companies that adopt these, ridiculous highfalutin mission statements, be it don't be evil, or Facebook's version of this, which was something like connect the whole world and bring it together. It's because people really wanted a better world. And because they were in such demand, because they could quit their job and get a better job across the street whenever they wanted, if their boss said, right, it's time to enshittify this thing, they would say, look, I missed my mother's funeral to deliver this app on time because I believed in the mission. I didn't do it so that you could add 30% more ads to it and deceive users trying to locate their local shoemaker or locksmith or, bank. I'm not going to do it. And if you try to make me do it, I quit and I'll go across the street and get a better job with the other guy. Today, that's no longer possible. 260,000 tech layoffs last year has disciplined the tech workforce. And because tech workers saw themselves not as workers, but as temporarily embarrassed founders, they never translated that power that they had due to scarcity into a more durable power that arises from solidarity, from forming a trade union. And as a result, their bosses can just fire them at will. They have no power once their scarcity goes away. And when a tech worker today says, I refuse to enshittify this thing that I put my heart and soul into, their boss says, fine, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. So you have the same mediocrities, running these companies who have been showing up for work every day since the, dial-up era, and going to the big lever on the wall labeled enshittification, just yanking it as hard as they can. And it used to be that lever barely budged because competition and regulation, adversarial interoperability, self-help measures, and rival technologies, and their own workers were all holding that lever up and stopping it from moving. Today, with all of those forces removed, the same people show up, yank on the lever as hard as they can, and the lever just goes all the way to 100. And that's why everything is turning into a pile of shit all at once right now.
You argue that due to the consolidation that leads to dominance in your recent book, The Internet Con, You argue that their networking effects and high switching costs are two key factors that grow and maintain tech platform dominance. Can you discuss how network effects help to grow the platforms and then the role of switching costs in keeping people trapped?
Yeah. So network effects is this term from economics. It describes a platform or service that gets more valuable as it attracts more users. An obvious example here would be something like Facebook, right? You signed up on Facebook not because like you like the user interface. You signed up because there were people there who you wanted to hang out with, and they made it valuable to you. Once you got there, other people signed up because they wanted to hang out with you. You made it more valuable too. So that is how the growth happens. And we see it all over the place. Every time someone buys an iPhone, that's a reason to make an app. Every time someone makes a new app, that's a reason to buy an iPhone. But network effects aren't the only things that keep those companies so profitable. Because normally with digital technology, it's really easy to switch from one technology to another. When Facebook kicked off and decided to open its doors to the public in 2006, everyone was already on MySpace. And so they needed a way to convince people to leave MySpace and come to Facebook. And they knew that people didn't want to stop hanging out with their friends on MySpace, even if they didn't like MySpace. And so they gave those users a bot. And if you gave that bot your login and your password, that bot would go off to MySpace several times a day, scrape all the messages that were waiting for you there, put them in your Facebook inbox. You could reply to them, and then it would push them back out to MySpace. And that meant that you just had a very low cost of switching. That is the switching cost, everything you have to give up in order to leave one service for another. But what's happened in the years since is that this expansion of IP law has made that kind of technology just illegal. Facebook takes the position that anything you do to modify its service is a crime. There was a program that a British technologist made called Unfollow Everything, and all it did was automate your browser. So this is just like puppeteering your browser, and it would go to all of the people you followed on Facebook and click the unfollow button. So Facebook wouldn't have any data about what you were interested in. And then you could go and you could like type in different feeds that you wanted to see. It's not for everyone, but lots of people really enjoyed this. And Facebook took the position that it was a felony to make it and shut it down. Right. So, this kind of switching cost reduction is just no longer in the cards, whereas it used to be there. And so, what that means is that today, if you want to leave Facebook and go somewhere else, you have to either uh, uh, make your peace with leaving behind everyone who matters to you there, or you have to convince them all to join you in your departure. And that's really hard. That's something that the economists call the collective action problem. And you've encountered this. If you're in a group chat with a half dozen friends and every week you organize a place to go for drinks or a movie to see or a board game to play, you know what a pain in the ass it can be to get 6 people to agree on this kind of thing. Now imagine it's Facebook and you're in a network of a couple hundred people, and those people are all there for different reasons. Sure, they're there to hang out with you, but they're also there because, that's how they organize their kids' little league game, or they emigrated from another country and that's how they talk to their families, or they have a rare disease and that's where everyone who shares their disease gathers to talk about treatment and commiserate with one another, or it's where their customers are. And convincing all of those people to give up all of that, or to convince all those people that they're connected with to go at once, that's just an impossibly difficult task to manage, which is why Facebook didn't try, which is why Facebook just gave people the bot that let them, interoperate with MySpace from Facebook.
And to the point of interoperability, once again, in the book, The Internet Con, you advocate for it pretty heavily. And you argue that we once had interoperability on the net, but today we only have it to the extent that big tech companies allow us to have it. And to that argument, Meta recently integrated Threads with Mastodon in beta form that allows people to share posts from Threads to Mastodon. So, first, can you describe how interoperability works in general and how you believe it promotes technological self determination?
Yeah, interoperability is one of those things that sounds, that the more you think about it, the harder it is to kind of pin down. But you know it when you see it. Like you don't have to, if you buy a pair of Nike shoes, you don't have to wear Nike socks or use Nike shoelaces with them, right? They interoperate. If you buy a car, you can put anyone's gas in it. If you use a browser, you can visit any website. Doesn't matter if the browser and the website were made by the same company. And interoperability comes in a lot of different flavors. Sometimes it's formal, so there's like standards. So, the reason you can screw any light bulb into any light fixture. There's literally a group of engineers who sat down and decided what that screw thread was going to look like, what its electrical characteristics were going to be, and so on. So that allowed anyone to make any light bulb that would go into any light socket. That's formal, collaborative interoperability. Then there's kind of indifferent interoperability. So like, once upon a time, a car manufacturer got the idea of putting one of those little button cigarette lighters in their car. Everyone else thought it was a good idea too. There were lots of different ways of making it. Sometimes they catch fire. Even, if they didn't, getting replacement parts when you inevitably lost the little button lighter was a pain in the ass. And so eventually that became a standard as well. And what that meant was that when someone else got the bright idea of using that same electric current that's in that receptacle to power a USB charger, they didn't need to get anyone's permission. They didn't need to ask around. They didn't need to even guess at what kind of electrical current was going through those cigarette lighter receptacles. They just looked up the standard and they were able to implement it. Even though it wasn't contemplated by the standard facilitated it. And then finally, there's the spiciest kind of interoperability, which is the adversarial interoperability. Reverse engineer that printer cartridge and make an interoperable cartridge where the ink doesn't cost $10,000 a gallon. Reverse engineer Microsoft Office and make either LibreOffice or iWork Suite or even Google Docs. Reverse engineer how a web server acts and make a crawler that goes to every web page and says, hey, can I get a copy of this page and all the pages linked off of it? And make a search engine, right? All of that stuff is stuff that was done often in the teeth of the desires of the people whose technologies you were interoperating with. And it was only possible in an environment where there was a moderate and reasonable form of IP law that took account of the legitimacy of these activities. The thing about interoperability, especially adversarial interoperability, is it creates a bargaining position for users of technology. It doesn't allow firms to unilaterally decide how your technology works. Think about what happened when Adobe went from selling you software to renting you software through the cloud. So Adobe Photoshop's widely used piece of software, and it has this feature in it called Pantone colors. It's a complicated story to explain what a Pantone color is, but suffice it to say that if you are going to print something like on an actual printer, there are some colors that printers can't produce with those 4 cartridges that are normally in there: the black, the purple, the black, the blue, the red, and the yellow. That sometimes you want to put down like gold foil, or you want to put down hot pink or something, and you want a color that you can't make by mixing those 4 colors. And Pantone is a way of describing what other chemicals you would use to make those colors, and it's very commonly used in print, and it's proprietary. There's a company that owns it. And so one day Adobe decided that they didn't want to pay the license fee for Pantone colors anymore, and so they just cut off Pantone. And then they pushed an update to all of their software, because you used it through the cloud, that took any Pantone colors that were in any of the files you'd ever created with Adobe Photoshop and just rendered them as black, so you could no longer see them. Right now, in a world of interoperability, this decision of Adobe to kind of nickel and dime Pantone by using its users as bargaining chips, it wouldn't have flown, because immediately you or someone who wanted to sell you something, or someone who just cared about the injustice of what you were going through, would have just made a rival Pantone module that rendered the colors better, right? And that would have been the end of it. In fact, Adobe probably wouldn't have even done it, because they knew that would be a possibility. But once they understand that no one can modify their technology except them, there's no reason not to be as abusive as they want to be. Now, it's entirely possible that they would have done it anyway, even if they'd anticipated that their users could have taken some self-help measure to fix it. But if they had, you would have been able to take the self-help measure. What we get when we lose interoperability is not just the force that prevents companies from giving into their worst impulses, but also the plan B that lets you counter those worst impulses with self-help measures that rescue you from their greed and venality.
And there have been attempts to try to create policy that would promote interoperability. For example, the Digital Markets Act, which you write about in the Internet Con, was passed by the EU in 2022, and it mandates interoperability between big tech services and new market entrants like startups and nonprofits. But it's really difficult to administer this. And I'm curious if you can detail why it's so difficult to do this.
Yeah, so, the DMA, Digital Markets Act, it's in effect now in Europe. And it says, for example, well, it starts with end-to-end encrypted messaging, and we can talk later if you'd like about why that might not be the best place to start. The short version is encrypted messaging is something that cops really hate and really want to go away because they like spying on people. And if you screw up interoperability with instant messaging, it'd be really easy to make the kind of mistake that would allow cops to spy on users, which would also allow criminals to spy on users. And so maybe that wasn't the best place to start. But even stipulating that it was fine, what they've said is, hey guys, you've got a couple of years to figure out what standard you're all going to adopt, and then you have to adopt it. And then you have to allow people to interoperate, but also, if we think someone is like doing something nefarious, right? Like if someone is stealing user data or has found a defect that they're exploiting to spy on users, we want you to shut it down. And the problem is that when you've only got a handful of giant companies and you say, hey, go make a standard that's fair to everyone else, it's going to be really hard to figure out whether or not they're doing it, or whether they're doing what you'd kind of expect them to do, which is cheat and make a standard that only works for them. And that's true whether or not you allow smaller companies and startups to participate in the standards making, because they're going to have an army of lawyers and engineers who can work on it, and those startups and individuals are just going to be much more constrained in terms of resources. The best time to fight a monopoly is before it forms. It's a lot harder once it's really big and kind of too big to fail and too big to jail and too big to care. The other problem is going to be that once it's up and running, these companies will from time to time shut it down. And if they shut it down and say, like, we did that because we thought there was an attack, and it turns out there wasn't an attack, they might not be lying, but they might be. And figuring out whether they're lying, right? Figuring out whether it was like a bona fide, like, error in judgment where they just erred on the side of caution and decided not to expose billions of users to the risk of surveillance, or identity theft, or whatever else could be going on through those gateways, or whether it was just a pretext to punish users who are disloyal enough to leave their service and go somewhere else. That's going to take years and years of investigation. To a first approximation, everybody who knows how Facebook works for Facebook. And so you're going to have to drag their engineers in and depose them and get technical experts and so on. And it's just very hard to do. Now, if we had adversarial interoperability, right, if we had the right to reverse engineer, then these companies could have a plan B, right? If you were interoperating with Facebook now through their gateway and Facebook shut down the gateway, you could transition, switch over or fall back to scraping or some other method that uses reverse engineering, guerrilla warfare to maintain it until such time as the situation has been resolved. And indeed, this could help our policymakers, because if what you find is that people who nominally have access to a formal interface that doesn't require this kind of messy guerrilla warfare still prefer the guerrilla warfare, still prefer the reverse engineering, then you can probably infer that that formal interface that the companies have assured you is everything their competitors need to compete with them effectively is in fact not effective.
We are beginning to receive some questions in the comments, so I'd love to bring up a question from Feruza, who asks, hi, Cory, do you think there's still potential for tech workers to unite and form a widespread trade union as a potential guardrail to enshittification, especially after the SAG-AFTRA wins?
Yeah. So I would say SAG-AFTRA's win was good, but the real win was the Writers Guild. SAG-AFTRA did an okay job. The Writers Guild just like kicked ass. And what's really important about what's going on with trade unionization right now is not only has the Biden administration's new general counsel for the National Labor Review Board really expanded protections for workers who are forming unions. So this is a woman called Jennifer Abruzzo. She has, on the one hand, said that anytime a company interferes with a union membership vote in a way that can materially affect the output of the vote, we no longer have to have the vote. The union is immediately recognized. So it's like she put a tilt sensor in this pinball machine, and if management shakes the machine, they automatically lose. And then the other trick that management likes to play is they say, okay, well, you got your union, but we're not going to negotiate for a contract. And she said, fine, if you don't negotiate for a contract, I can't impose a contract on you. But what I can do is I can force you to follow the terms of a contract in a related business that has negotiated a contract with its workers. So there's just no reason not to come to the table and bargain for a contract. So on the one hand, we have much more labor power, and the two greatest tactics for union busting have been invalidated by the National Labor Review Board. And on the other hand, we've had a series of historic strikes, not just the screenwriters, not just SAG-AFTRA, but notably, we've had these strikes against the big three automakers by the UAW, the United Auto Workers. The United Auto Workers for many years was a rotten union. It was corrupt. Its leadership had not allowed a fair election in decades. And what happened was the kind of up and coming organizers in the union helped organize the Harvard grad students, who are among the most exploited workers in the education sector. And so after the Harvard grad students joined the UAW, they memorized the UAW rules. And at the next UAW leadership convention, whenever the old guard tried to call cloture or quorum to stop a vote or to force a vote, and in other words, to cheat so that there wouldn't be a fair election, up would pop one of these Harvard grad kids like a jack in the box and say, actually, I think you'll find that violates Rule 207, Section 3, subset A1. And the vote went ahead. And so we got the first real fair union election in decades of UAW history. And immediately the new leader, Sean Fain, took them out on strike against the big three automakers, won an unprecedented victory against all three. And here's where it gets really cool. He said, we're going to make all of these contracts expire in 2028. And all of you out there who are negotiating a contract right now, set the expiry date for 2028 so that when all of our contracts expire, we can have a general strike without violating American labor law, which basically bans general strikes, but does allow everyone who is bargaining for a contract to go out on strike at the same time if their contracts all expire at the same time. So all across the country, we have unions that are organizing for this. Now, no matter what happens with this coming election, 2028 is going to be a crazy year. Either we're going to be figuring out who succeeds Joe Biden, and we're going to be having a contest for the soul of the Democratic Party and whether or not it's going to represent workers or bankers, or we're going to be figuring out what to do about Trump, who clearly wants to be president for life and is backed by people who think that. Either way, the fact that we are going to be going into that year with every worker in America either legally allowed to strike or incentivized to illegally strike and go out with them in solidarity means that we're going to have an enormous wave of labor activism that is going to be able to accomplish extremely progressive goals beyond the limited goals that are normally present in trade union negotiation, and that will strike at some of our great social issues. When the LA Teachers Union went out on strike, they didn't just bargain for wages. They also bargained for things like a park within walking distance of every school in the LA Unified School District, because our inner city schools are in these concrete wastelands that are heat islands and just terrible. They also bargained to force the removal of immigration officials who would camp out at the school gates and check the ID of parents who are picking up their kids from school. These were not about the teachers. These were about their students. And we're about to see one of the largest strikes in recent US history because the California grad students are about to go out. And one of their major demands is divestment from Israel. And from the IDF. And so these are not labor goals, they're social goals. So that is the kind of labor militancy we're seeing right now. We're seeing more union organizing in the tech sector than we've ever seen. And it's not just a change in the bargaining power of tech workers that's waking them up to the importance of being unionized, but also part of this general current of labor activism and labor militancy in America that views itself not just as a way to get better deals for working people, but as a critical feature of positive social change.
It looks like we have time for one last question. before we wrap up for this live stream. So Greg Walters asks, Cory, first time hearing you, thank you. Can you put your gaze on AI and large language models and talk about the oncoming or current enshittification? Also, I can see AI eliminating IP, copyrights, etc. How do you see AI impacting? Also, this current union minimum wage evolution, I believe, accelerates the move to automation and the erosion of unions. Again, what say you?
Well, look, the automation doesn't necessarily erode wages. Automation only erodes wages in environments in which you don't have co-determination with workers. If workers get to co-determine the way that automation works, then rather than having, then we can have what automation scholars call centaurism. So a centaur is when you have a human who's assisted by a machine, like a human body or a human head on a robot on a horse's body. So, I have a car. I live in Los Angeles, so I have to have a car. And it's got a little robot. It's got a thing that tries to recognize when I put on my turn signal if there's a car in my blind spot, and it beeps. So this is a thing that takes my squishy human inattentive, imperfect mind and augments it with a machine that makes me better. And then there's reverse centaurs, right? Reverse centaurs would be someone like an Amazon driver that has an automated system that watches their eyeballs and docks their pay if it thinks they're watching the wrong part of the road. It has another automation system that tells them what routes they have to take, irrespective of whether or not there are obstructions in the traffic that they can see and the automation system can't. It has automation systems that check their maneuvers, and if they hit the brakes too hard or if they turn the wheel too hard, it docks their pay again. And then they have an automation system that sets a quota, right? And so what they are is a human being assisting a robot. They're a reverse centaur. They're a robot head on a human body. And so if we're worried about automation and labor, then what we need are unions, right? What we need is co-determination to make sure that, for example, when the hospital near you buys an automation system that can detect some of the solid mass tumors that a radiologist might miss when they look at your chest x-ray, that this is not as part of a project to fire half the radiologists and then turn the rest of them into error checking backup for the robot, or even worse, as a kind of moral crumple zone, so that when the robot misses your tumor and you die, that they say, actually, it wasn't the robot that missed the tumor, it was the human that reviewed the robot's work at an inhuman pace, right? That was being worked to exhaustion to serve as this kind of fig leaf for automation. And instead, what we say is, oh, hey, today your radiologist is reviewing what, 10 x-rays a day? Fine. We're going to bring in the AI system, and it's going to do a second opinion. And if it disagrees with that radiologist once a day, then the radiologist is only going to do 9 x-rays that day. They're going to go back and check it again, right? So that's the difference between centaurs and reverse centaurs, and it requires co-determination. On the question of AI and LLMs, look, I don't think AI can do my job. I don't think AI can do most jobs. What I do think AI salesmen can do is convince your boss that they can fire you and replace you with an LLM, right? That is the most prevalent form of AI disinformation, is that you can be fired and replaced with an LLM that can do your job. Now, of course, you can be fired and replaced with an AI that can't do your job. That's easy. You can be fired and replaced with like a stuffed animal that can't do your job. What AI salesmen are really good at is confirming your boss's own most fervent wish, which is that he can fire you and replace you with software who doesn't get uppity. Right. This is why I think we saw such a drive for AI in screenwriting. It's not because the writers are very expensive in the context of the overall production of a film. It's because you prompt an AI the way that you prompt a writing room, right? You go to the writer and you say, hey, make me ET, but make it about a dog. And somewhere in the second act, have a car chase. And then I want a big love story that pays off in the third act. Now, you say that to an LLM, you can go out for a 3-martini lunch and come back, and it'll produce like reams of bot shit that are exactly what you ordered. It won't be a good movie, but it'll be exactly what you ordered. Meanwhile, you say that to a human writer, and they're going to roll their eyes so hard that they fall out and roll across the floor, and everyone's going to have to spend half an hour crawling around on their hands and knees looking for their eyeballs. And they're going to call you a fucking idiot to your face. Right. And so this is why bosses love the idea of automation. We see this again and again. So I don't think that AI is going to get good enough to do my job. I mean, it might. If that happens, co-determination is what's going to keep it from being toxic. But you know, the story about how AI is going to get good enough to do my job is that we've got this thing that can do sort of 80% of the job that's easy, and the 20% that's hard we have no idea how to do, but we'll just keep shoveling more machine learning into the furnace, and eventually this AI will get so full of training data that it will turn into a self-aware conscious being. And this is like saying, okay, we've got these horses and we've bred them to go faster and faster, and if we keep up this selective breeding program, eventually we predict that one of our prize mares is going to give birth to a locomotive. Like, it's just, there's no theory that explains it. It's just wishful thinking and hype that justifies a $13 trillion valuation by Morgan Stanley.
Yes. And Cory, thank you so much for taking the time to join me and All Tech is Humans community here on this Thursday afternoon. For more information, you can go to pluralistic.net as well as craphound.com. Cory, where else can people find you and keep up with you?
Well, you know, my books are available wherever books are sold. You can see my name there on the screen. I write a lot. I wrote 9 books during lockdown. I write when I'm anxious. So there's been, 3 novels and a bunch of nonfiction books in the last couple of years, and most of them were national bestsellers. So if you like the way I talk and you like the stories I tell, by all means, go out and pick them up, give them a shot, and help me put my kid through university. She graduates next year.
Congratulations. And thank you so much, Cory. And to keep up with everything we're doing here at All Tech is Human, you can head on over to alltechishuman.org to learn more and get involved. Thank you all and have a fantastic afternoon.
Thanks.